Gifted adults in relation with neurotypical partners. Hi, friends. This is Diane, and we're talking today about gifted adults in primary relationships with people who are neurotypical. See, often we seek out people and we end up in relationship with people who are very similar within maybe a few IQ points, with having a lot of aesthetic and emotional kind of intimacy and other things that play into it. But there are a lot of people in the world that are gifted and talented and have overexcitabilities and maybe even twice exceptional, who are in relationships, and happily so, with people who are neurotypical. And I was asked by a listener to do this episode. And so this is for you. You've asked for it, and here you go. There's a lot to say here, and we'll see. I might have to do two episodes. I don't know. But it is a really good thing. And I'm glad that you asked me, because sometimes this piece gets left over. When we're talking about giftedness, it's like, oh, yeah, we get in relationships with neurotypical people, and there's a lot of it. In fact, it's in my own family. And when I read the request, I'm like, oh, of course, it's right under my nose, but I didn't think about it then. So let's get into it. Let's talk about somebody who's gifted and talented, maybe with some overexcitabilities or twice exceptional with some ADD, or maybe bipolar, or maybe depression or anxiety, and gifted, and gets into a relationship with somebody who's neurotypical, who maybe doesn't have the same level of overexcitability, or the same intellectual curiosity, or the same intensity of living. How do you manage that, right? How do we do it in a functional, healthy, happy way? Well, the first thing I want to talk about is paying attention to what's in common. It's very easy for us as people to look at the differences. Well, I'm gifted and you're not. Or I'm emotionally sensitive, so you have to accommodate me, and you're not as sensitive. I was asked when I was a child why I was so sensitive in some not very nice ways by my own family. Yeah. So, what are the common traits? So, I ask you, if you're in a relationship of any kind, whether it's a friendship, a lover, a partner, a marriage, whatever, what are the common traits? Because even if somebody's gifted and the other person's neurotypical, we will have common traits. We'll have things that matter to us, that are important. We'll have things that we experience very similarly. And those things are important to acknowledge. Like, I have some people in my life that do not see the environment with the same level of intensity I do in caring for it. And that doesn't mean they don't care about it. It's not the same intensity. And so we want to find out what is common, even if the sensitivity levels are different. Because if we can appreciate what's similar, if we can appreciate and focus on the good and what works, the relationship will have much more rapport and be much more harmonious. And that's the goal, right? So, yes, there's always going to be nuance. Now, one of the things that people talk about all the time with neurodiversity and giftedness and everything, it seems to me in language that many people see it as like these chunks, like I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. Well, I don't see it that way. I see it all as very, very blended. And there's all different nuances. And if you put pressure on the system in just the right way, like fear, or an abundance of pain, or some kind of trauma, or anger of some kind, those things put pressure on the system, and it can appear to be different, our individual selves, along with all of our relations. So I look at it as all people have a level of neurodiversity, because no two of us are the same. That none of our neurons fire exactly the same in the same way. We all have a different autobiography, and things in our autobiography affect our neurology, our biology, and how we function in our belief systems. Things in our generational patterning affects our DNA, which affects our biology and our neurology. So, in my mind, all of us are varied. And the healthier way to look at it is what's in common with the right flavors, the right things that we're putting together here, and how can we make them work in our favor if this is a relationship that we really care about and want. And so I don't like to silo things because I just don't have that experience. I work with gifted and talented people and have for decades and decades and decades. And I also work with some people who are neurotypical. I have some good friends of mine that would not be classified as gifted, and I would never trade that relationship for anything. And we've had to learn how to communicate within those common traits so that our relationship works. Now, I don't think this other person even realizes these kinds of things, that I've had to pay attention to that and accommodate different things. I don't think the person even realizes. But it doesn't matter that they don't realize. It matters that the investment in the relationship has worked. It has worked and is working. We've been friends for, I don't know, 30 years, I think. So it's important that we all understand we have personal accountability and responsibility. I've had people say, "Oh, you have great friends." And I go, "Right." And it takes a lot of investment. It's not an accident. So if you're in a relationship with somebody who is different from you, in the gifted arena or neurotypical, neurodivergent, all these words, if they're different than you, then it's important to look for common traits. What do you have in common with this person, even if you experience it a little different? Now, you want to handle challenges in the relationship by honoring your communication styles. Often I see in couples, especially, the hunter and hunted, the runner and the runnee, the chaser. And so what happens is one person has to talk it all out right away and starts chasing the person literally, sometimes from room to room or sometimes just figuratively. But you have to talk to me, you have to talk to me now. And the other person's running, going, I don't want to talk now. I don't want to deal with this now. Leave me alone. So the first thing to understand is your communication styles. You have to bring them together. And so if you are the person who needs some space and time before you handle difficult things, then you want to learn how to say that. And if you're the person who usually wants to get it all solved right away and you're in a hurry and you're going to push, 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 your lesson is to back off a little bit and understand that not everybody sees the world the way you do. I have a good friend of mine who he always is doing that, chasing his poor wife all around like, I want to talk about it now. And so I've been teaching her how to set those boundaries and how he needs to have the boundary to step back a minute. So part of a healthy relationship is talking about these scenarios when the emotion is not high. You can't talk about, oh, you're the runner and I'm the chaser in the middle of the issue. You talk about it at a predetermined or non-escalated emotional time. Like, okay, let's talk about the fact that you like to go off by yourself and process, and I like to have everything handled right away, especially if it's high emotion. How are we going to move forward together in a way that works? So, one of the things that you want to talk about with the other person is, well, how do you want to handle it? What do you want to do? And then you also want to have like a code word for when your intensity is getting too high or you feel things are off that says, time out, go to your separate corners, deal with it later. And then hear me when I say respect the decision you made when you weren't emotional. So if you made a decision together as a couple that when the emotions are heated, we're going to step back and we're going to wait 30 minutes before we talk again, or an hour, or whatever it is. You make that decision. Then when the time comes, you must respect that decision. Not, well, I know I said that, but, ba, 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 which my friend is guilty of. And no, 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 that's not it. If you make the decision, it's self respect and respect of your partner to honor the decision. Now, if the decision doesn't work after you've honored it, then at another non emotionally escalated time, you change what you're going to do. Because, see, gifted people have emotional sensitivity and are very intense people. And not all neurotypical people are as intense. So our intensity can overwhelm and blind somebody. And if we get heated and we get into it, it's really off-putting sometimes, no matter how much we're loved or how much we love the other person. So it's incredibly important that we realize that our intensity intellectually, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, comes through our communication. 80% of our communication is nonverbal. So it's the pace, it's your way you're blinking your eyes, it's how you hold your body, it's all of these things. So it takes practice and it takes respecting your partner enough to listen to what they need and accommodating to the best of your ability, just like it's that on their side too. Takes two, right? So we want to look at how we can handle challenges by not staying in the heat of the moment all the time. Chasing somebody isn't going to work and running isn't going to work. So what are you going to do? You're going to talk in non-escalated times about how to handle emotionally intense times. You want to pay attention to what strengths you each have that are complementary. Now we started out with things that are kind of similar, right? But complementary strengths mean that my strength complements your strength. And now in every relationship that's true. There's things that I'm really good at that you're not so good at. And there's things that you're really great at now I'm not so great at. Now I might have a level of um adequacy maybe, or a level of okay, I can do it a little bit, but I'm talking about good at it, right? So how can we understand we have complementary strengths and honor that? Your neurotypical partner or friend has a lot of strengths. Just because they may not be neurodiverse and may not be gifted, they actually might even have an easier life on the internal landscape than you. Because twice exceptional people, it's not easy living in our skin. It's not easy. I don't care how many coping skills we have or what we're doing, it's not easy. Being gifted is hard because our world is not set up for it. So we're always trying to like navigate something that's not set up for us, which is kind of interesting because I'm only 4'11 and the world is not set up for me in the physical world. I'm always having to step on step stools. My car doesn't even have all the right controls to get my seat in the way that's perfect for me to be able to see. I have to accommodate the whole world being taller than me. I mean, I was just volunteered at a tennis tournament and there were the men's professional tennis tournament in Winston. And there was a player literally who was so tall that my eyes were at his barely above his hips. His legs were almost as long as my whole body. Like that was so crazy. I was like looking up and going, wow, that's another atmosphere up there. So we want to look at complementary strengths. So when I have my tall friends around that have long arms, I go, okay, can you reach that? Or will you help me with this? Because some things I just can't do. I can't reach that. So what are your complementary strengths? What are the strengths that are different that you each have, right? And understand that we want to balance those perspectives. We want to balance these things out and understand internally, not just in our head, but in our heart, how our complements can work together. Complementary, work together. Because you didn't get in this relationship by accident. There is something there that holds it together, and they are most likely complementary strengths. Things that you might not be so great at that the other person's great at, or something that you're really great at that they really could use some support in. It could be something like emotional expression. It could be a skill or a trade or just how to walk through life. It's all of those things. So pay attention to them and honor your complementary strengths. And then of course, you want to have effective communication. Now, learning to communicate really well is a long process sometimes, and there's lots of things to say here. But one of the big ones is active listening and reflective listening. Like sometimes when somebody says something to you, say back to them, this is what I heard you say. That's active listening. Not in a parrot format, but making sure that what that person said and what you heard match. Because a lot of times they don't. We think we're saying something that we think we know what the other person hears and we think we know what it is, but when it comes back at us, we're like, no, that's not what I mean. So you have a chance then to correct it. Now, reflective listening is when you take whatever somebody is sharing, maybe it's a story or a situation from work or school or something, and you reflect on how that affects the other person. So, like, sometimes my friends will call me and they're talking about things, and I'll reflect with them like, "Oh, that experience must have been very empowering for you, or maybe very sad for you, or whatever," and reflect to them the essence, the energy, and the content as I'm experiencing it, so they know they're heard. Because remember, in all relationships, there's two primary needs: to feel loved and heard. It's important that the person you are in a relationship with feels heard. And active listening and reflective listening are very easy ways to make sure that that person feels heard. It also ensures that what you think you're hearing is, in fact, what they mean. And it goes both ways. So sometimes, if you're trying to say something as a gifted person and your partner is not getting it, then you might want to nicely say, what are you hearing me say? Because somehow we're missing each other. And then they might say what they're hearing you say. And then that gives you a chance to shift your language or your words or whatever in order to feel heard. Because active listening and reflective listening can take care of getting rid of a lot of arguments and upset before they even happen, because we now have a meeting of the minds. We're not meeting of the minds, we're going to be in trouble somewhere, somehow. We want to find common ground, and we want to be realistic about what we expect out of another person. So we're always looking for what's complementary, what goes together, right? How it is that we function together, because you're not together by accident, like I said. And you want to look for where the common ground is. I have a good friend of mine who, when we first were becoming friends many years ago, there seemed to be a lot of common ground, like things that we both enjoyed. But over time, it became very clear that some of the things are really different. There are some parts of what's important to me that are different for her, and what's important to her is different from me. But there are things in our friendship that are common. And so our relationship, our friendship is centered around what's common. And there's a lot of differences in both of us, and we both honor and respect that in each other, but we don't have to draw it in and make a mess of our friendship, these things that aren't necessarily common. We want to have realistic expectations of your partner and of yourself. Now, gifted people are notorious for beating themselves up, for being very harsh on themselves, for being overly critical, for being perfectionistic, for being sometimes hard to get along with because of all those things. And gifted people have a tendency to miss social cues and not really understand things. So it's important that we have realistic expectations of ourselves and of the other person. Your partner is not a mind reader. So the phrase I hear all the time, you know I love you. Well, I might know it, but how are you showing it? Because I'm not a mind reader and you're not a mind reader. So what are the realistic expectations, and where is the common ground? It's important that you have it identified. So I suggest, if you haven't done this in your relationship, that you have some protected, dedicated conversations that you can talk about these things. I have a couple that I'm working with now. And so every couple weeks when I see them, they have homework, and part of their homework is to have a protected, dedicated time for a conversation about whatever we're working on, so that they can sit there uninterrupted, without a phone, without being called, without a distraction, and have a meeting of the minds and an understanding of the real needs of the other person and of themselves, sometimes beyond the superficial, so that they can grow their relationship and evolve it into something that's meaningful. It's already meaningful in a lot of ways, and they're adding to it. Because sometimes working with a mentor or working with somebody that's outside of your relationship to help with it does not mean there's something wrong necessarily, right? I have a lot of people call me just because they want to enhance things and just want to keep growing, and they would like a guide. They would like somebody who's a mentor, who can show the way, who can help them, hold them accountable, where they can have feedback, and somebody who'll celebrate with them all of the goodness, all of the greatness, and will be there for them when things get challenging, because we want to navigate emotional issues very well. We want to learn how to build empathy with each other. It's not easy being gifted. It's not easy being neurotypical. It's not easy being a human being in this world most of the time. And so your relationship is your primary support often. And so it matters that you build empathy. Empathy is the ability to feel and care for the other person in a selfless manner. Now, that doesn't mean no boundaries and you give it all away and you burn yourself out. And that means I can feel for you. I care about you that deeply. And so, one of the other things I want to talk about here is supporting each other's growth. Because the truth is what all relationships are for, is to help us grow, to help us move and transition and transform and develop as more whole, complete, satisfied humans. Because for decades, generations, hundreds of years, pain, discord, and disconnection has been passed down. I mean, I know some people that think that the food that comes through the drive-through window in the bag, that that's how it started. I just saw a statistic the other day that like 70, I think it was 70 something percent of the people in the United States think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. There are people in the Senate who think that they can't do a meeting in the Bahamas because it might sink if there's too many people. Like, what? So sometimes we have got to support each other's growth because there's blind spots in all of us. We don't know what we don't know. Everybody has room to grow. So the key is to have empathy and be aware of it. So if you're a neurotypical person in a relationship with a gifted person, good luck. Have a good time because it's not easy for them or you all the time. But it's also joyous and beautiful and wonderful because there's a depth and richness that you couldn't get anywhere else. So within all of the variants and all of the challenges and all of the stuff, don't forget to look for the joy and the beauty. Don't forget to connect heart to heart and understand that you showed up in this person's life and they showed up in your life for a really great reason. It's easy to get mired down in the gook of the world. I think it's time that we start looking for the good in any relationship. And we want to make sure that we use our own life as a great example for how to be open and receptive and responsive, how we can work together with people no matter how different they are than we are. Because diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? People make those comments, and that's a big thing, DEI. Well, if you're a neurotypical and you're in a relationship with a gifted person, that's diversity. Yeah, it is. So you're living it. You're living a living, breathing example of how two different types of brains and people and processes and nuances and experience of the world can come together as a harmonious piece. You're a living, breathing example of the power of bringing two different organizations, organisms, situations, whatever word, bringing two things together that are different. They're diverse. And when you bring them together, there is a lot of inclusion and beauty and harmony that can come out of it if people are willing and open and looking for the strengths and looking for what's good about it. Now, in every situation, there's challenges, and I'm not trying to be Pollyanna, but what I'm trying to say is that we live in a world that is so focused on what's wrong that sometimes I think we forget to look for what's right. So there's nothing wrong with anybody. You, the gifted person, the person who even asked me to do this show, and all other gifted people, there's nothing wrong with you. I don't care how many diagnoses you have, there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect, whole, and complete exactly as you are. And you, the neurotypical person who's listening to me trying to figure out what all these words mean and what it even all is, there's nothing wrong with you either. You're perfect, you're whole and complete exactly as you are. You have all the inner resources you could possibly need to live the life of your dreams. And so, for everybody out there, whether you realize if you're gifted or not, or you're trying to pretend like everything I say, I just got an email the other day, everything you say resonates with me, but I don't think I'm gifted. I'm like, well, All right. You don't have to use that word because, like I said, it's blended everywhere. The bigger thing is, are you loving yourself? Are you honoring who you are? Are you looking for where you can take your own unique diversity and build powerful relationships with somebody who's neurotypical, with other gifted people, and with people who don't even know if they're gifted or neurotypical and never heard those words before? I hope this has helped you. As always, you're free. Any of you can make a get to know you call with me. The link is in the show notes. I am happy to have a conversation with anybody about any of these topics or whatever else you want to talk about. I have a firm belief in being of service and making myself available. And so there you have it. The offer is on the table. If you take me up on it, great. If you don't, great. So remember, look for the commonalities, feel the strengths, look for the complementary strengths. Give yourself permission to say yes to something beautiful. Keep your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you because you're a rock star. You're here on purpose with a mighty purpose. So go out there in the world and live and breathe and stand in your sovereignty as the amazing human being that you are. And until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, this is Dianne saying to you from my heart to your heart, be well.